Welcome to episode 39 of Sport SA Daily Diary. Today we're chatting to rugby referee Stuart Berry. Hey Stuart, how you doing, mate?
Hello, Adam. Yeah, very well, thank you. Nice to catch up via an exchange of office dating, I suppose.
Absolutely, it's seems to be the way and the norm going forward.
Yeah, very much so.
I think for businesses as well as pleasure, just everything seems to be flying. Netflix is flying and Facebook is flying. Everything seems to be now social media.
The digital age is definitely upon us.
Yeah, which is a bit different to your sort of industry and what you've been doing the last number of years. Rugby refereeing. That's a very brave choice.
Yeah, it is. And well, when I say brave, it's certainly it's been something that I look back on now, having been involved in it for 20 years. And have some wonderful memories from a sport and a profession that has brought me so much fulfillment in my life. And as much as there've been many tough times, as comes with that industry and that job, I can certainly tell you that the good times have outweighed those tough times.
Yeah, no, I'm sure. Stu, you started reffing at school.
I did, yeah. So I was playing rugby at school. And our coach took us on a refereeing course. And we did this. And then once I'd finished the refereeing course, essentially done it in the hope that we'd understand the laws a little bit better and give away a few penalties, which didn't quite work. And then I got a phone call on a Friday to say, hey, the third team, or it was the under 14Bs, didn't have a referee tomorrow. Can I do it? So it was an 8 o'clock kickoff. My game was at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. So I was like, yeah, with pleasure. So refereed that, quite enjoyed it. So started doing the under 14s in the morning, playing in the afternoons. And then one thing led to the next and got to a stage where I just had to choose between the two. And yeah, here we are, having started at the age of 17, now 20 years later at 37. And yeah, it's brought me a lot of travel, a lot of heartache and a lot of happiness.
Yeah, I'm sure, and we'll get into some of all of those emotions through our chat. You obviously then went to uni. Did you carry on reffing while at uni?
I did. So I was up in Pietermaritzburg, which was a wonderful rugby culture university. There've been some wonderful Springbok captains that have come out of the Maritzburg University, and I suppose the Sharks and previously the Banana Boys have got a rich history with Pietermaritzburg University. So I stayed in digs, obviously, with a whole fair number of people. I did my master's degree in hydrological engineering. And while I was doing that, obviously continued refereeing. So I started in 1999, which was my standard 9 year, which I did my basic refereeing course, and then really got into it in 2001. And then just having refereed through the Natal Rugby Union, got an opportunity to go to one of the national weeks, the Grand Cornwall week, which is the under 16 week. And then from there, someone at SA Rugby saw something that they liked. And I suppose that's when the professional element to my career started. And in 2003, managed to get onto what was then the SA Rugby C panel, which was referees 20 to 60 in the country, which started to do under 19 Currie Cup, the amateur game, or the provincial amateur games, which were taking place under SA Rugby's control at that stage.
And when then did you get your first sort of high profile game, or Super Rugby / Currie Cup first category game, should I say?
First category game. So, yeah, I think it's an interesting question, because your first high profile game, I suppose, is very much relevant to where you are in your career and what you've done. So like I remember refereeing the first team between Gelofte and Durban North College. And at the time I was sort of a year and a half into my career. And this was for me massive. This was my World Cup final at that stage. To obviously get a first team game, there were probably 500 to 1,000 people in the crowd. And those are the things, like any professional sportsman, that get you up, the big occasions. And I suppose your big occasion changes as you go through your career. So from a professional rugby perspective, my Currie Cup debut was in 2006. I did Lions Cheetahs. And then, sorry, not 2006, 2008. And then 2010, managed to get an opportunity on the World 7 Series for 2 seasons, which was great. And then 2012, I think it was, 2013, beginning of 2013 was my Super Rugby debut. And then end of 2013 got my Test debut, and that led on to 4 years of doing Test rugby and a World Cup in England in 2015. And then a big opportunity that came my way was to, I suppose, be the first person to pioneer a bit of a refereeing career in the Northern Hemisphere. And that has recently led to being involved in European rugby. So, yeah, it's been a career, I suppose, that has lasted 20 years of, as I said earlier, ups and downs. But certainly one when I end it, and don't know when that will happen yet, but certainly one where I end it, where I can look back and say that I've been a part of a lot of sectors of rugby, not just in Southern Hemisphere, but now more recently, which I'm absolutely loving, is Northern Hemisphere rugby.
And Stu, when you were sort of progressing through your career in the early days of Currie Cup, were you a Natal Sharks fan, first of all? And secondly, how difficult, if you were, was it to be able to be sort of neutral in those games?
Yeah, so I think as a youngster, you know, I grew up having been schooled in KZN, going to Kings Park to support the Banana Boys, and it was some wonderful memories that I remember. So I suppose, yes, I grew up as a Shark supporter, but I think the higher you go in the rugby, the more you emotionally separate from being attached to a particular team, because it becomes a job. And I think the other element to that is rugby's become so fast that as a referee on the field, you don't really have the time to consider an incident happening in front of you, and whether it's the Sharks, the Lions, the Stormers, the Munster, Leinster, whoever it may be. You see something, you process it, you react to it, and then post that you happen to be, oh, okay, that happens to be against the Sharks, or that happens to be against the Lions. So I think certainly from our perspective, the higher you go, the more neutral you become. And I think that's probably the reason why they don't allow us to referee our own countries, which I think every referee in the world would agree. There's so much emotion involved in Test rugby that I think the subconscious would take over significantly when it came to refereeing Test rugby. And it's just not, and I don't think we'll ever get to the stage where you can referee your own country, and rightly so. I don't think there are many referees that would want to do that. We prefer sitting in the stand, drinking a beer and supporting the Springboks instead.
And I think it would just open a can of worms if something did happen. I don't think it's even worth the risk.
Yeah, I agree totally. And it's been interesting to follow the whole neutrality versus non-neutrality argument. So SANZAAR and Super Rugby approach have an approach of non-neutrality, so it's best referee for the game. And interestingly enough, that's been driven by the coaches. That's not driven by a referee manager or a referee body or the referees. The coaches were the ones that really said, we don't care who refs. We trust the neutrality of the referees. We want best referee for the best game. Yeah. So that was very much coach-driven, whereas in the Northern Hemisphere, they've certainly gone towards neutrality purely to make sure that they just remove an element of social media, whatever kind of discussion it may be, come a game where Stuart might be refereeing his home province versus another province, and it doesn't matter how accurate my decision is in the very last minute that leads to one team winning or not. That will always come under the microscope, and that's just the reality of professional sport.
Yeah, absolutely. And Stu, I mean, if we look at the difference between soccer and rugby, in terms of refereeing and in terms of player respect towards the referees, football, I mean, it's shocking. It is atrocious. I play football and I'm just as bad as any of those English Premier League players.
Yeah.
But it's amazing how respectful the rugby guys are of the referee. Where do you think that comes from? Because it's equally as competitive. It means just as much, but yet the guys are restrained and actually behave.
Yeah, totally. So I think, as with any business, culture comes from the top. And if you look at soccer, you've got an arrangement where the players are at times more powerful than FIFA and the controlling bodies like English Premier League, etc. And until the English Premier League, until FIFA, until the Bundesliga, until Spanish La Liga really come down hard on the respect thing, it becomes very hard for someone like yourself that plays social soccer on a Friday night, when you see your idols, when you see the professional players that you watch on TV acting in a particular way, then you feel it's the same for you to do that. So I think it is a culture that starts top down. And what's the saying is rugby is played by it's a gentleman's game played by thugs on the field, and soccer's vice versa. I've actually always said I firmly believe the way to sort soccer out is to open the referee's mic. So like you can hear everything that the referee in rugby says. I think that provides a fair amount of accountability on the field to the referee and the players. And I think if you did that in soccer, there'd be carnage for 2 weeks. But I think after that, everyone would be into it, and everyone would understand that this can't continue like this. So, yeah, I think rugby's been very good at protecting its core ethos. And I think world rugby as a whole, and then obviously each of the unions below that, have to take a huge amount of credibility, because they could very easily have chosen not to protect that element of the game. And they have done and continue to do so. And I think as long as that remains, we'll obviously have some kind of respect towards the referee. And I think what's important for your viewers and listeners to understand is that there's certainly a huge amount of work that we do from a refereeing perspective, is to make sure that the respect that is given isn't paid back with any kind of arrogance. And I think that's a really important thing for any referee who's coming up, is to understand that with power comes a fair amount of responsibility. And just because you have the ability to demand respect, you demand respect through your actions. You don't demand respect through blowing a whistle and trying to be dictatorial or be like a principal. And if you look at the successful referees around the world, they have that ability to know on a field when to be in a conversation with someone, which makes the opposition or makes the opposite person you're talking to feel part of your conversation, and when to literally just put your foot down and say, hey, this is how it's going to be, either fit in or there's going to be trouble. And that balance, I think, is really an important skill in refereeing now compared to referees in the 90s, which were very much your principal policeman type. You will do this, you will do that, here's the finger, walk back 10.
And I think that was showcased incredibly well in the 2019 World Cup. South Africa was up in arms, obviously, when Romain Poit was given the semi-final. He's obviously not had the best history with South Africa, but in that semi-final, and then again in the final, he was brilliant. He controlled the game, he managed the game, and it actually worked out very well. So, I mean, there are those big games that a ref can struggle with. Did you find the bigger the game, the harder it became?
No, not necessarily the bigger the game. So it's very much based on type of game and conditions as well, for example. So, and I think this is one of the big misconceptions. So if you look at Super Rugby, for example, the New Zealand derbies generally are your better games of rugby. You end up with a really free-flowing, wonderful game of rugby, good, hard, good contest at the breakdown. So take a Crusaders Highlanders, for example. Often people will say, well, that's a hard game to ref. But it's actually, in my opinion, a lot easier to referee than a Brumbies Waratahs game. And often you find the desperate teams, the teams that are not potentially performing well, are the much harder teams to referee, or specific teams who play different styles of rugby. So take the Lions, for example. The Lions play a real open, quick ball style of rugby, which becomes a lot easier to referee than potentially a traditional Bull style of rugby, which is very much about forward dominance, competing at the breakdown, slowing the ball down, which requires more refereeing. So I wouldn't say it's necessarily the higher you go or the more magnitude of the event, but it's very specific on where rugby is at that point in time. Are our teams winning games based on defense slowing the ball down, or are teams winning games based on spreading it wide and scoring tries? So where the game is at that particular moment in time, and also combined with the teams that are playing and specific players. I mean, I'll never forget my Super Rugby debut, which was Western Force versus Cheetahs in Bloemfontein. And the two key people that I had to deal with there was David Pocock, who was captain of the Western Force at the time, then Heinrich Brosseau, who was on the Cheetahs side. And at the time, probably the best two fetchers in the world. And so people would look at Cheetahs Force and go, well, the two teams were probably lower down on the table, so that becomes an easier game to referee because it wasn't as a big an occasion as a Sharks Bulls game potentially on the same weekend. But that particular game was really, really tough to referee because you had to manage two world-class players who knew that it was your first game. Their job is to slow the ball down and steal it at the breakdown. And their job is to try and get away with it. So it became so much more than just refereeing a game of rugby that had laws associated with it. You need to manage individuals within that game. And that's a really important part, understanding a game and what individuals and what players in that game and how they challenge you as a referee, not only from a law perspective, but from a management and a balance and relevance perspective.
So, I mean, we talk about those sorts of players, and I'm going to list a few, and it's purely my opinion and from what I see on TV, but managing those players, do you actually enjoy that more? Or would you prefer an easier player? So if you look at the likes of Pocock, George Gregan, Michael Hooper, Sean Fitzpatrick, they were always in the ref's ear. They're always chasing the ref, in the ref's ear, trying to win their case as much as possible. Did you enjoy managing those types of personalities in the game? Or did you prefer the quieter, sort of restrained guys that actually just got on with the game?
So I think for me personally, communication is a big part of my refereeing, and I'd say probably one of the reasons I've had a 20-year career versus a 10, 15-year career. So I won't be as good technically as many of the referees out there, but the ability to communicate, the ability to sell your decision, the ability to provide a thought process to players on the field, commentators, and also spectators as to why you've made a decision, I think is such an important skill in refereeing and will be, for me, probably one of the biggest skills in refereeing going forward. I think also as a referee, the higher you go, the more you want to be tested. You're there for the occasion. When I say you're there for the occasion, you're up for the occasion. We don't referee to referee the big ones. It's great to get the big games. And when you get the big games, you want the best players, because the best players produce the best in everyone else around them. They produce epic games of rugby, which you want to be part of. And they also bring the best out in you as a referee. So you would prepare specifically for certain players. You know that you will be, if you are refereeing George Gregan, you know that he is going to challenge you. And the way in which you meet that is not to challenge back, but to stand your ground. And when I say that, obviously in a very respectful way, but to be prepared that if you have an intelligent rugby discussion with someone who's challenged you on the field, then it gives them the ability to go, oh, okay, cool, and move back. And I remember very clearly, one of my rugby highlights was doing the Pro 14 final in 2018, which was Leinster Scarlets. And it was the first time that I'd refereed Johnny Sexton. And he was the captain of Leinster. And in my preparation leading up to that game, I'd spoken to a few of the Irish referees who'd refereed him often to try and understand the person and the character. And it was very clear that Johnny wanted to be heard. He wanted to have the ability to come to a referee and to say his comments. And we prepared specifically as a team of referees for that. So when there was a particular incident in the game and Johnny came up rather emotional, wanted to be heard, our approach was to keep quiet, to listen to him. It was very clear when he was done. When he was done, provide an explanation. And we had an incident where exactly that happened. He came up quite emotional, quite insistent on providing an opinion, which was great. And for a player of that magnitude, he's earned the right to give an opinion, even more so as a captain. And he finished, we provided our explanation, and he looked at me and goes, oh, okay, I get that. And he walked back. And I think it's very important to understand the characters you're dealing with. One of my lasting memories was my first test when I did Argentina-Italy in Argentina. And Augustine Crevi was the captain. I dealt with Augustine often in Super Rugby. I'd refereed the Jaguares quite often. And we had an incident, or not an incident, but a passage of play 10 minutes into the game where Italy were really pushing on Argentina's try line. And penalty after penalty, facilitator needed me to have a firm discussion with Augustine. And Augustine came up to me. We had a chat and he said to me, Stu, for me, my English not too good. I'm not sure I understand. And I knew at that opportunity, there was an opportunity for me to really get him on my side. And my comment to him was, Augustine, you've understood me in Super Rugby for 2 years and your English was perfect in the change room before. So I'm pretty sure you're getting the comment that I'm making. And he actually put his hand on me and he said, we have a common ground. And he moved back. And ever since then, just that one little moment of humor and connection with a particular character meant that we had the Argentinians on our side. And not only in that game, but the relationship that I then had to have with them through Super Rugby and other test matches beyond that. So yeah, good characters that challenge you on the field are good for the game. And I think it's really important as a referee to understand that challenge is going to be there, and the challenge doesn't necessarily require you to have the last say. Sometimes the answer is, oh, good point, I'll consider that.
Very diplomatically said. Just speaking about different nations and personalities and stuff, I worked in London on the Tour de France in 2007, and none of the people from the Tour de France spoke English, wanted to speak English. I didn't speak any French. And we made it work. We made a plan. How do you find refereeing players on the pitch that don't speak any English? That must be very challenging, whether it's in your sevens career or managing the likes of Argentina or Italy or whoever.
Yeah.
Have there been some hair-raising moments because you just don't understand each other?
So several comments too. I think the first thing is that English is a global language for rugby. And the reality is that the higher you go, the more those players have watched international games throughout. So even if you don't speak English, the reality is that the Argentinians understand what hands in the ruck mean. They understand what leave the ball means. They understand pushback. They understand all the communicative things that referees generally bring through in a game because they've watched so much rugby on TV. If I were to go and referee an Argentinian club game at Division 3 level, it might be a totally different scenario. So the first part is I think that there is a fair amount of basic English understood and basic reactions to communication on the field from a referee's perspective. The second thing is now with international rugby, you have players playing all over the world. So the reality is there's at least one person in the team who is playing in the English Premiership, playing in Ireland, playing in Scotland, playing in South Africa, Australia, wherever it is. And that person has the ability to communicate. So yes, you certainly, like the way in which I would manage a game from a communication perspective if I was refereeing England, Wales, would be totally different to the way that I would approach it from a communication perspective if I was doing Argentina, France. And that's got nothing to do with the level of game. It's got nothing to do with the caliber of player, but it's purely got to do with your ability to get an outcome in the game. And vice versa. If you look at the French referees, for example, when the French referees referee England versus Scotland, their communication is absolutely simple and to the point. It's, for me, dangerous tackle, yellow card, bye. Whereas if you got someone like a Wayne Barnes or Yaku Paper or myself, in that same situation, we would probably do the communication to say, okay, number 6, you started high, it's dangerous, there's no mitigating factors, it's above the neck, blah, 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 yellow card. It's the same outcome, but we've explained it in so many more words. And the risk to a French referee is that if they try and explain it in that many words, the reality is that because of their English ability, they're not going to be able to get their message across. And the same applies to us. When I go and referee France versus Argentina and so on, is you need to default to simplicity. And I think there's a message in that overall that potentially we do, as referees, try to over-communicate too much in a game of professional rugby at the high end. I certainly don't prefer to a lower end.
And Stuart, every career has high moments and low moments. I think in terms of a referee, as opposed to a player, you're a lot more in the firing line than a player can be. There's obviously been a few hair-raising moments in your career. Negative press, probably, I don't know about death threats or that kind of thing. How do you actually deal with, yes, you've made a mistake, yes, you're human, but you are being crucified for it. How do you actually deal with that? Do you completely ignore the press, or what is your sort of how you manage that situation?
Yeah, so it's been interesting for me personally because when I started with refereeing, there was no social media, and social media has become such a massive influencer in terms of professional sport. And I talk not just only referees but players. Players are subject to massive abuse. Players are subject to huge abuse on social media. And again, therein lies an opportunity for them as to whether they want to engage with that or not. So from our side, I've been very specific in that my purpose for social media, which I am on, is purely for my work outside of rugby. I do very little interaction on it with regards to rugby. I just don't think it is a good fit for an active referee. And I think, you can control how much media you take in. And certain referees love it. Certain referees have the ability to see it, totally separate, not have any issue with it. Others, it'll be the first thing they do when they get back to the hotel after a game is to try and understand what their performance like was in the court of public judgment. And I think that's really dangerous because it certainly works on your subconscious. So I think it's very much personally based. For me, I think it hasn't really influenced me too much over the years. I stay away from most of the rugby writing and the rugby reports, not just for the risk of seeing negative media about yourself, but also for the risk of seeing opinions on players and teams, which I think can subconsciously influence you as a referee. What you don't want to do is the night before a Sharks-Bulls game, read how the newspaper is saying that the Sharks tight head has been totally illegal for the last 5 years. And that can potentially influence the way that you referee and blow a game the next day. So I think, as a referee, you can choose the information you take and no one's forcing it down you. But I also think, and the one thing I've learned over the years is people don't hate you, the person. They hate the decisions that you've represented. Yeah. And I'll never forget an interaction that I had. I did Bulls Crusaders in 2011, I think it was. And the Crusaders beat the Bulls at Loftus in the last minute with a penalty that was probably one of the easier penalties that I had to give. But obviously, South African refereeing Bulls Crusaders, Bulls lost in the last minute. And afterwards, we went down to a friend who had a braai going, and I could see there was a guy there that was with him who was angry with me. He was hurtful that I was the referee and there was a penalty in the last minute. And just over the night, managed to share a beer with him, managed to get into rugby discussions. And he came to me at the end of the night. In fact, not the end of the night. He actually phoned me the next day. He managed to, through my mutual friend, get myself a number, phone me. And he phoned me to say, I just want to tell you that I despise your decision from yesterday, but I think you're a wonderful person and I absolutely enjoyed spending time with you. And I think that's where people often mirror or often cloud the person as a referee and the fact that we don't make decisions because we're bad people. Yes, we're going to get it wrong, but the ability to separate the person and their character from the decision that they made, you only get that ability once you meet people in person. So we as referees totally understand that people hate the decisions that we make, not necessarily the people that we are. But the ability to separate that as a new referee becomes very hard.
And just speaking of a guy waiting for you on the side of the pitch, have you ever had any seriously hair-raising moments where you think, oh, crap, there's going to be trouble here?
No, I mean, you hear the stories from the Cape Club Rugby, which some of the referees tell you about there. The only one I've ever had, which was a really interesting experience, was I refereed Madagascar versus the Ivory Coast in a World Cup qualifier in 2007 in Antananarivo. And I was totally underprepared for rugby in Madagascar. Obviously, you don't hear much about it, but their stadium is 35,000 strong, packed, solid. They absolutely love their rugby, but by nature are very aggressive people, just as a country and as a culture. And the safety briefing before was that you had to make sure that you finished the game somewhere close to the middle of the field. And what will happen is the riot police come onto the field. They stand around all the teams and everyone in the middle. They wait for the players to they wait for the crowd to exit. And then once the stadium is clear, you can make your way through to the change rooms. And I'll never forget that experience. And to this day, one of my more memorable rugby experiences, not because of the magnitude of the game, but just because it was so different. And you realize how rugby culture in different countries takes you around the place. So obviously you get the unhappy coach afterwards. And I think part of our job is understanding that it's their job. They're emotional. They're entitled to be emotional. And I would say 9 out of 10 times when you've had the unreasonable, emotional coach immediately after a game who looks as though he's absolutely pissed off with you and has no interest in ever seeing you again, generally come Monday or Tuesday, the two of you have had a decent discussion. And he's put his hand up and said, listen, I was a bit emotional after the game. I regret that. I apologize. And we understand that that's part of the game. We don't take personal offense to that. as much as it may be in public and other people see that happen. It's a part of it.
Yeah, but I mean, that said, you need to be very sort of patient in terms of dealing with these, and restrained. I remember when I was working for FIFA during the World Cup here in South Africa, after the final, where Holland had just lost, I went into the change room to collect some stuff. And I remember Van Bommel coming and standing right in my face and lambasting me. Now, I had no impact on the game. I wasn't the referee, Neil Webb, nothing. But did this like scream at me and shout at me, and all I could do was stand there and just take it in.
Yeah,
so
totally.
You guys you must have an amazing amount of patience and will to, okay, I just need to keep a check here and not overreact.
Yeah, and I think, Adam, it comes back to one of the comments I said earlier, is you earn respect through behavior. And I think in moments like, the reality is coaches are out there to try and get an upper hand on referees, whether that's pre, during, or post a game. So I don't think it's realistic that referees can be friends with coaches, because I just don't think that works. But that doesn't mean you can't be respected both ways. And respect doesn't mean that you agree on everything. Respect just means that someone believes that you operate in a professional and a good manner. And I think that's what we have control over as a referee. I have no control over the emotions of a coach and how he potentially reacts, but I do have control over my emotions and how I react. And those are the ones that I think I need to make sure that I keep intact.
Yeah, no, I mean, I couldn't agree more. Stu, just in closing, you must have had a few comical moments happen throughout your career, whether it's something that's been said in the scrums or an action that's happened. Has anything stood out that's been like, you actually just want to fall on the floor and laugh until you can no longer go?
Yeah, there was one actually when I was on touch. So I was running touch for Craig Joubert. The Bulls were playing the Brumbies. Back in, must have been 2008. So George Gregan was the captain of the Brumbies. And it was Craig Joubert's first Super Rugby game. And Craig often tells the story, and I know he won't mind me telling the story as well. But obviously we can hear everything because there's open mics on the referees. As touch judges, we connected to the referees as well. And the scrums hadn't gone well at all. We were probably 20, 25 minutes into the game, lots of collapses. So Craig had defaulted to one of his sort of banker ways of dealing with the front rows, and he'd called the front rows across, and the captains were there as well, and he basically just said to the front rows, listen guys, there are 31 referees, or there are 30 referees on this field, 31 referees on the field at the moment, obviously the two teams and him. And he says, please guys, let's just calm down, let me referee the game. You need to keep quiet now. And George Gregan piped up, and you could hear it over the microphone. Didn't come over on TV, but George Gregan piped up. He said, Craig, yep, you're right. There are 31 referees, and at the moment, you don't even feature in the top 10. And I thought, and interesting enough, everyone laughed. It broke the ice, and the scrums were perfect from there on. So therein lies a great example of a legendary player who said something to a legendary referee, and it ended up breaking the ice and actually sorting out what the problem at hand was, which was collapsed scrums, which no one wanted. So I think, for me, that stands out as, I suppose, one of the more light-hearted moments. There are lots of small little comments during a game, which some you can't obviously mention in public, and there are also certain players that you always know will bring humour to a game, whether it's a tight game, whether it's not a tight game, whether a team's winning or not. And that's important, I think, that humour on the field and that ability to just disconnect from the fact that this is a professional game with a fair amount of money involved. I think it's an important element of the game, and long may those characters live.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. It really enhances the game and just brings it back down to reality sometimes, because it's so run by money and competition and.
Agree totally.
Stuart, it's been great chatting to you today. Thanks for your time on Sport SA Daily Diary. Good luck with what you're doing in the Northern Hemisphere. Long may it continue. Managing those palms like Andy Farrell can't be easy. But good luck with it, and take care of yourself.
Wonderful. Thanks for having me, Adam. Appreciate your time.
Take care. Catch us again tomorrow on Sport SA Daily Diary, where we'll be chatting to Swiss mountain biker Ariane Luthi.